Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Here we're going to discuss about Liverpool versus Crystal Palace, the game that happened yesterday. So Jurgen Klopp went for a completely changed side, and by completely I mean the back four was all new, meaning it was the four that didn't play against AC Milan. And I think what we are seeing now is that Klopp is trusting Kostas Tsimikas a little more in that wide area, left full back position. And I think that's a good sign. Ibrahim Konate starts his first game since joining Liverpool. One of the interesting things about this game is that most of the time both teams were playing purely based on the instincts of the players, because the game was that open. Both teams counter-attacked well. Both teams pressed hard. They pressed okay. They didn't press great, but you got the sense that both teams were kind of attacking at some points. And during those stages, you felt that the players were actually playing on their own wit and not based on their manager's thought process. And so what you would see is that Palace faded a little bit towards the end of the first half. And they played a very great second half, and then they faded after the goal. So it's an interesting game, and I'm dividing this game into that's Liverpool Attack, Liverpool Defence, and Liverpool Attack again. Just because it's Liverpool Attack, Liverpool Defence, Liverpool Attack doesn't mean even during those periods of time the opposite does not happen. So the game was kind of open, and I think the first 10 to 15 minutes of the game was very exciting. Palace winning a few set pieces and actually being very dangerous with their ball. Actually, Alison, basically had to make a great save at the second minute of the game, which basically is what kept the game kind of in the balance and in fact saved us. And this is, I think, out of the 5 Premier League games, there are already 4 games in which Alison is responsible for saving a clean sheet or saving a goal where we should have lost 2 or 3 goals. And that's, again, very good contribution. And already he made another save towards the end of the game also. And to keep in mind, I think for this game, he's one of the man of the match candidates. But after Palace had their very early attack, Liverpool also attacked. We had some good crosses coming in from James Milner, which we dealt with very well. And so let's start with the analysis. So Palace went with a 4-1-4-1 kind of defensive setup when they were defending. And Liverpool actually started with Mo Salah very wide, because that's usually how he plays. Mane was a little bit central. Henderson actually occupied this area more than he did this area, right? And I think the significant difference is that if you're a midfielder, it's very important to, try and cover. If you're starting here, it's very important to cover this space. And I feel like Henderson, because he started more or less in this position, most attacks, he was more or less covering this position. And although it looks easy, it actually wasn't as straightforward, because Crystal Palace would push their players in. And even if Crystal Palace pushed their player in, I felt like in some positions, Henderson and Liverpool really worked that side of the game very well, especially during the first half. A lot of our attacks were on the right-hand side. And it was the work of Henderson, James Milner, and Mo Salah actually, making some good passes, getting in these positions and crossing the ball into the box, which was very good, And what this actually enabled Liverpool to do is that we got a lot of joy down the wide areas, whether that was right or left. Of course, we didn't get it like immediately. It was not like immediately we got good possession. But what would happen is a long ball would come from the midfield, Thiago Alcantara, Mo Salah, or Fabinho, or, VVD, or just a simple pass from Milner or Kostas Tsimikas. And what that would create is some holes in the Palace's defense, because Palace were playing 4-on-4-1 and attacking very high. It left a lot of spaces for us to work with in this position. But again, because these two players were kind of very deep while defending, they couldn't connect the play, and Henderson was in this direction. So I felt like Liverpool did attack well, and they tried to take the players one-on-one with all the other players joining in later on. And you got the feeling that Liverpool's transitions were much better in the wide position rather than in the center position. And I think this is the fundamental problem, right? So in the AC Milan game, for example, during the second or third minute, actually, Naby Keita, interestingly, receives the ball in this position and then gives a very, very difficult pass here. And what that does is that opens up this position in between the midfield and defense, and we got a very good opportunity early on. But that was like the only time in the game that happened. And you saw that against AC Milan, most of our attacks were down the wide areas and, so on and so forth. But coming back to Crystal Palace, we completely attacked on the wide areas, and Crystal Palace gave us some space. So when Milner, Henderson, and Mo Salah got into these positions, because Palace were kind of static, I felt like Palace were not just flat and, not only defending and trying to press, but they were kind of static, meaning they were not aggressive in the way they approached the press. And so what you see is that Liverpool got a lot of crossing opportunities in these areas, very dangerous positions. It was kind of interesting because you felt that Crystal Palace weren't aggressive enough against Liverpool, and that worked to Liverpool's advantage. And you saw something similar happening in this side also, where Kostas Tsimikas and, to a lesser extent, Alcantara and Diego Jota, for example, really combined well in this direction. Diego Jota is very much suited in coming this way in attack, and he likes that. And so when he saw the opportunities to do it, he took it. In either case, Palace's pressing was not that good. I felt that they didn't press well, and Liverpool took full advantage of it, which is good work. I felt like we attacked very well, and we put a lot of pressure on Crystal Palace, But the pressure was not just in one direction. So when Crystal Palace attacked, our pressing was also kind of okay. We didn't do that well. And so what happened was, although Palace got a few attacks, you felt that Liverpool were able to defend better because Palace didn't really make good passing decisions, or, they didn't launch the ball quicker, they didn't release it. And so even when, Liverpool found themselves isolated sometimes with Christian Benteke on VVD or Christian Benteke on Konate, you felt that Liverpool were kind of equipped to deal with it. Because even when they were overrun, you felt that Crystal Palace game wasn't working. And it kind of makes a lot of sense because in the second half, this completely changes. And you see Crystal Palace executing the game plan very well. So one of the interesting things about the way we attacked, we are sticking to the concept of Liverpool attacking, is that although Crystal Palace were static and not really giving much, you felt that there were spaces opening up in the center. Because when these players are here and when they're when there's a deep impact, you feel that Liverpool actually, if they worked it out, they could have had some positions here, gotten between the midfield and defensive line. It was stiff, but it was still static enough for Liverpool to make good inroads. Maybe use these players as shields and, get your midfielders in there. But what we needed was running midfields, and I felt like Liverpool tried to implement passing midfielders or long-range or short-range passing midfielders more than they tried to do running midfield work, which means there's a lot of 1-2s involved, and Liverpool didn't do that. But I do feel that if Liverpool had done that, we would have opened up the pitch so much more, because already we were pressing Palace in the wide areas in our attack. To pound them in the middle area makes the whole thing extremely difficult for Palace to deal with. And I felt like there was potential, and we didn't use it. But, anyways, in the end it was all right. Liverpool also found the opportunity to switch play a lot, in attack during this game, which is a good thing usually, right? And there have been games in this season where Liverpool struggled to do that. So that's what I said, right? Palace were not that great pressing, and they didn't really threaten Liverpool when Liverpool attacked. They were very static. And so what you would see is that Palace would have this kind of quasi-semicircular structure on which they operated in defending. Just to give you an idea, they had a quasi-semicircle. Sorry for that terrible shape. Let me draw that again. Much better. It's semicircular shape, and Liverpool had to actually make inroads here by running, by doing one-touch passing, taking a few risks. Liverpool are capable of doing that, but you saw that Alcantara was always so deep in these positions that for him to run into these positions was hard. Henderson, usually when he's in these positions, he's always looking to get a cross in or try to work out a cross for the fullback who will be running into this position. And so you felt that Liverpool didn't really exploit the fact that the semicircle was not perfect. And so you saw a lot of switch play happening, and it was kind of frustrating, but okay, I mean, there are some sacrifices you have to make for putting your midfielders deep in, and I felt that was the case today. I do think a stronger team can beat Crystal Palace, but I felt like we showed good signs today, as opposed to other games. I felt like this was a much better game from Liverpool. Even the AC Milan game was very good. I mean, there was brilliant pressing in that game. So like I said earlier, I've written my notes here, so I just want to say this. Liverpool midfielders were very deep, but they did a good job of connecting the attackers, Thiago Alcantara and Fabinho the same way, which is, I think, very important to Liverpool's game. We saw this against AC Milan. We saw this in the previous week in our win against Leeds. The Liverpool's midfielders, Alcantara, Fabinho, and all these people, they are sitting very deep. And because in the counter-attack, they're not joining quick enough, they're doing enough work to actually connect the attack and midfield. Because in previous times, what would happen is the onus would fall on the centre-backs to do it. Because the centre-backs are preoccupied, they would just clear the ball, and Liverpool would keep losing the ball. And you had the cycle going on in a few games last season where Liverpool will win the ball in the box, they would just put it out. And, we found it difficult to start attacks. This season, though, Klopp has fixed this to a certain extent by, basically ordering his defenders to, okay, you got the ball, pass it out to the midfielders, right? And it's the midfielders' duty to actually launch the long ball. Now, this is, of course, when Liverpool are defending in the box in this area, then they are expected to pass it to the midfielders who will then start the counter-attack. And, while in previous seasons, we didn't do that too effectively. Now, if Henderson is there, we would do it, but otherwise we were not doing it. I wonder why. Chini Wijnaldum. Yeah, so we had players last season that once they received the ball, didn't want to pass forward. They wanted to pass backwards. It's a good thing that those players are gone now, and we have the same set of players, but with a slightly different mentality. So that's basically how it goes. One thing I would like to say is that on the performance on Konate, right? Konate played his first Premier League game, and it was not an easy game. Crystal Palace are not easy. But you felt that he struggled against Crystal Palace's attackers. And that's a crying shame. It shouldn't happen. But he struggled a little bit, not only in terms of defending them, but also in terms of the pace and the running. Usually young players, when they come into the Premier League, they do struggle a little bit with the pace, especially in Liverpool, not in Manchester United. Manchester United players just right there immediately start making an impact. I think Konate will be okay in another 6 months, which is why I think we will see him more sparingly. I think Konate's transition to the team will be very similar to the way Andy Robertson was transitioned into the team during his first season. Remember, Klopp kept playing Milner for a long time, and Andy Robertson would get an appearance here and there. I think Konate will be introduced like that, because even during this game, there were moments in which you felt that he couldn't keep up with Zaha and Ayew, Jordan Ayew and Christian Benteke. I mean, Christian Benteke he dealt with okayly, but Jordan Ayew and Zaha he did struggle a little bit. And in general, there were certain things I didn't like, which I will discuss a little later. Overall, it was a decent performance from Konate. I would like to see much better because, there was one legitimate penalty call that Zaha had. A little bit of a push on Zaha's hand during the game. In the first half, I think the 20th minute or something, and if I were a Palace fan, I would be angry that, we didn't even get a penalty. So I felt like Konate does need to improve. But I think overall, if you're facing a culture shock or a footballing culture shock to be more specific, I think it's still a decent start. But he has a long way to go. And to summarize, basically, the first half, or, not just the first half, just the way the whole game went, a lot of it was just edgy, it was open, it was a clear battle between the wits of the players many times, for many, many moments in the game. Especially the first 30 minutes was very indicative of that. You saw a lot of this in the second half as well. But, overall, there was 45 minutes of players on their own and 45 minutes where there were clear tactical strategies from the managers coming alive. And I think when I discuss the second half of Palace, I think it's very easy to correlate why Palace played the way they did in the first half, because they did exactly what they did in the second half, just a lot more effectively and with a lot more vigor and tension, and with just that extra man. You felt like Palace had 12 men on the pitch in the second half, basically. But anyways, coming back to our point. Now, Henderson was playing slightly wide, and one of the things this did was it made it difficult, like I said, to make inroads in the midfield, which I was very much looking forward to, because in this semicircular structure, it could be very valuable to actually break down the structure. Because what this does is, once you get into this position with the ball, if the Palace defenders are here and you have moved the ball into these positions, once you get the ball in these positions, what you're going to do is you're going to expect your fullbacks to run in here, and that's similar over here. And because Liverpool didn't make inroads, I think Liverpool, couldn't really make this happen a lot. And what you saw was more of Kostas Tsimikas, James Milner, and Mo Salah, and all these people able to put crosses, but from very wide areas, right? Rather than from here, we saw more crosses coming in from very wide. And what is interesting is that Jordan Henderson played very wide in midfield, right? But you saw him in this position specifically. You saw him specifically in this position many times. And I think the reason is because the instruction or the training from Klopp was that when you're crossing, cross it to the far post. So, that's not the far post. So cross it to the far post. So if the far post is here, he was instructed to cross it to the far post. And you saw Henderson a few occasions coming to these positions and hitting the ball, or, making something of the attack. And I think the idea was that Liverpool wanted to cross very deep, irrespective of where they crossed from. Cross it to the far post, And I think there are plenty of examples of this during the game where Liverpool basically were crossing in this area and this area rather than here or here, except, during the set pieces. And I think it was by design that this was done, because there is no other explanation for why Henderson will be this far wide. And in that aspect, I think it makes sense that Henderson is kind of wide, but otherwise it just doesn't make sense. There were times in which you wanted Henderson to be a little more central to get the game going. Now let's move on to a little bit of defense from Liverpool, because after the 25th minute, you saw Palace attacking a little more. And Palace already had their attacks. They already made some attacks, but Liverpool more or less crushed them. Especially after the 5th minute, Liverpool crushed most of the attack until the 25th minute. And as per the usual, Liverpool's midfielders were completely overrun. Palace simply had to get the ball into these positions. If you look at the spaces here, right now they don't look like much. But in the game, there were humongous spaces. Fabinho basically was left in no man's land. And, Crystal Palace, they simply crushed Liverpool in the way they counterattack sometimes. Liverpool had no answer. Palace found themselves 2-on-3, 2-on-4, 3-on-4 all the time, because Liverpool's midfielders were simply not defending. I don't want to include Jota, but it's how it is. You have to defend, and Liverpool didn't defend, and you felt that Crystal Palace were easily able to get the ball here, go in, right? Basically use Christian Benteke as their point man. I don't know how to say this, but they came from the wide areas and they just pointed the entire attack into the center. And the idea was that once Christian Benteke has the ball, he has to give it back and, create some one-touch situations in this area, so that Crystal Palace have got good opportunities in here and good shooting chances. And they did get some good shooting chances in this area. But you felt that Liverpool, in a way, kind of were able to delay the attack by basically, with the help of Kostas Tsimikas and Milner, who were more or less putting a lot of pressure on these wide players, And because of that, you can see that Benteke found himself a little more isolated in these positions, and whichever centre-back was on him was able to deal with him. And, basically, Crystal Palace couldn't be as effective as they wanted it to be. So Liverpool midfielders were getting overrun, but because of the way Milner and Kostas Tsimikas were able to defend the wide areas from these attackers, basically this whole space created, and what happened was Crystal Palace's attack were kind of falling flat. They did have one dangerous time where they got a shot or something, but it wasn't too much of a danger. But the idea here is that the amount of times these spaces were exploited was crazy, and I think Liverpool totally need to address this, because this happened during the AC Milan game, during the Leeds game. It's been happening since the beginning of the season, basically. But, in the end, Liverpool were able to do enough in the first half to keep the ball out. From Liverpool, the way we pressed them during the last 10 minutes of the first half, we killed them. And this is exactly how it looked like. Palace just couldn't get out of their own box. And even if they did, when Zaha or anybody got the ball in this position, you had fouls going left and right from Liverpool. Tactical fouls, and Henderson got a yellow card in the first half for that, I think, the first half. So it was just crazy stuff, and basically what that led to was one of the corners led to the goal. And we also, before that, we had a crazy miss from Jota, but there was signs that Liverpool completely took domination of the ball, except for the first 5 minutes. in the 25th to 35th minute, which is 15 minutes, the first half, Liverpool completely dominated. The times where Palace attacked, sometimes they looked dangerous, but overall Liverpool crushed them. And we got a goal from Mane in the 42nd minute. Overall, I think the referee was a little bit inexperienced. He seemed inexperienced. A lot of fouls that both sides did just went away. I mean, there were fouls. There were times where you would just give a yellow card, and he didn't give a yellow card. I think the referee is kind of inexperienced, and it was showing a little bit. I just wanted to say that before we start the second half. Now, the second half was just brilliant because when Palace started the game, it was amazing. So Palace, when they started the second half, what they basically did was they started pressing really well. For some reason, in the second half, Palace pressed very well. And so the theme on which we're going to start the second half is the theme in which Liverpool were defending and were getting out-pressed, and Liverpool's counterattacks were just getting nullified. What you would see happening was that when Liverpool basically put the ball to Salah, because that was mostly what was happening, right, from any of these players, he was basically crowded out. He was left with no space. Even if Milner came, there was no space because he was just crowded out. The ball was just bullied off of him. And we saw this happening to Henderson, to Milner, not much to Fabinho, and the same with Mane. I mean, once they got the ball, they were just surrounded, bullied, and the ball was bullied off them. And what is interesting was that even when Palace did this, they were able to maintain their shape. So in the second half, Palace attacked, basically pressed very high. Once Liverpool, let's say for example, Palace attacked. So Palace's attack was coming like this, from all directions towards the center, right? So this was Palace's idea of attacking. They would come from all the wide directions and just come in, right? Let's say the attack died off, right? Virgil van Dijk is trying to get the ball to midfield. No, that's not going to happen because these players are just simply crushing him, right? And even if they didn't win the ball from Alcantara, they won the ball from Jota or from Mane, because all of these players were attacking him. And once Mane got the ball, two players would surround him. The same thing in the opposite direction. If, Konate was trying to get the ball to Fabinho would immediately be surrounded by these players. And you felt that Palace actually had 12 men in the game because that's how amazing it was. And Fabinho didn't lose the ball too much here. He did lose the ball once in the center of the pitch, but that's different. Fabinho would give the ball to, say, Mo Salah. And then Mo Salah would be completely surrounded, and there was no way for him to go. What happened was that once Liverpool got the ball, sometimes they would try to counterattack. And so all these fullbacks would start running. In the meantime, the ball hasn't even crossed this direction. And so Palace had these wide areas to attack through. And it was incredible. Palace simply pressed, and Liverpool actually didn't pass well. So that's one of the other things that Liverpool didn't do well, is that they didn't pass well in the second half, and they got crushed and tortured in the press, When even if Liverpool got the ball in this position with Mo Salah or something, Crystal Palace would win the ball and immediately launch the ball. This is the difference between Crystal Palace first half and second half. In the first half, they didn't launch the ball too much. In the second half, they did it vehemently. All the time they did it. And you can see the difference between what happened inside the dressing room of Crystal Palace. I'm pretty sure Patrick Vieira went in there and told them, get the ball, launch it forward. Once you launch it forward, then we can start the attack. You guys aren't even launching it forward. How are we supposed to start the attack? So let's say, for example, an attack was launched in this position, and, Jordan Ayew was here. Jordan Ayew would try to come into these positions, or he would try and pass the ball to Christian Benteke. Christian Benteke had to release the ball in this direction, and once the ball was here, he needed to get the ball to finish it. What's interesting about this whole thing is that it looks like a push-pull effect, right? there's a push to Benteke, and then there's a pull from Benteke. So it was kind of a push-pull attacking moment where Palace was basically coming into the center. I'm just showing it in the opposite direction. Benteke receives the ball and he pulls it back into the same position. But this time, because Liverpool's defenders are reeling in, and they see the pull, they start stumbling in this direction. By the time, Palace are already attacking down the wide areas, And so what this does is this basically isolated Liverpool's defenders into defending Palace. Now, because Liverpool were already counter-attacking, the fullbacks were all gone. And what happened was Palace found themselves 3 on 2 on Crystal Palace on several occasions. It's kind of painful to watch, but Liverpool initially made too many mistakes in that one. But once they realized what was happening, they kind of settled down. They said, okay, let's not do this too much. But they didn't settle down too much because that's Liverpool, right? It's gung-ho attack, gung-ho counter-attacking. And there was only 2 things I thought, right? In all of these things, Crystal Palace, one thing they couldn't do is get good shots on Alison, right? Because even if the push and the pull worked out and they were able to get good balls into the box, the final touch of making the shot on Alison was lacking. They did have 1 or 2 shots, and Alison saved them easily. They did have one chance, actually, nearly 1-on-1, and Alison saved that again. So Alison didn't just save 1 goal in this game, he saved 2 goals. But you felt that overall, Crystal Palace were not really threatening goal, even if they simply dominated this area of the pitch. And even when the ball came here, with Liverpool in possession, they simply pushed it back in. And you saw Palace actually do a very good job. I was very impressed by the way Palace approached the second half and actually outplayed Liverpool for much of the second half. After that goal in the 77th minute, which is far away, which is 32 minutes later that Liverpool actually started regaining the ball. It took the 77th minute goal from Salah to actually change the complexion again. Till then, Crystal Palace kept pounding on Liverpool, and they were doing a good job except for scoring a goal. And you felt that the goal threat was minimal, even if the attacking threat was huge. And it takes lapses of concentration for Liverpool to get this wrong, basically. And one of the good things that Crystal Palace did was, compared to the first half, was that they did crowd the wide areas, right? So in the first half, remember I said Liverpool had a lot of joy in the wide areas. Second half, they didn't allow that. Second half, Crystal Palace put 2 or 3 players on these guys. And what that meant was Mo Salah and Sadio Mane didn't have much of a choice. And it was a very conscious decision to do this, because basically what was happening was that Crystal Palace's back 4 wasn't attacking too much. And the one defender they have was everywhere, right? Basically crowding out the wide attackers and stopping the attack before it happens. And it was brilliant. This level of pressing is very rare. And when I saw it, I was amazed because they did very well. They increased the numbers. So basically what Crystal Palace did was they increased the numbers in the wide areas. They crushed the pressing game in this high area of the pitch. And basically what this means is that Liverpool found it difficult to pass out. Liverpool found it difficult to cross out into the wide areas. And once those 2 things were controlled, Palace were all over Liverpool. Now, Liverpool did get a few chances to pass through and go on the attack. But what Crystal Palace would do is effectively push the players out wide and force them to give the ball to Mo Salah. But once Mo Salah got the ball, these 3 players would go on him, crowd him, and basically finish him. Finish the attack. And it's kind of genius. If you look at this position, just look at this position. There are 5 players here, there are 2 players here, and there are 3 players here. And I think even if all of these positions are open all of these positions, okay, this position is not open, this position is defended. Even if all of these positions can be exploited and this position is open, because of the way Crystal Palace because of the way Crystal Palace pressed the ball so high up, these players, they could never, our 5 players, they could never leave this position. And Henderson was also deep. Milner was found in no man's land. So slowly he started also going backwards and not attacking too much. What you can see is that Crystal Palace managed to isolate our players. And then when they got the ball, they simply egg-bombed them like this. So it was an interesting way of pressing. Very risky. And I think it worked. It worked because Crystal Palace did not lose any of their goals from open play. All 3 of Liverpool's goals actually came from set pieces, which is probably something you already knew. But I think it showed that Crystal Palace actually did a good job. And given that Crystal Palace beat Tottenham 3-0 in the previous game, I'm going to just say that Patrick Vieira is a good manager and he kind of knows what he's doing. But I do think he's taking a lot of risks. Why? Because he's approaching every game tactically. Usually, managers, what they do is they set the team. They have a foundation for the team. So if you look at Crystal Palace, you know how they're going to play week in and week out. It's the same with Liverpool. You know how they're going to play week in and week out. But the manager creates enough tactical flexibility so that the team can morph from their foundations to approach different games different ways. And Klopp has done this effectively. Even during his second year at Liverpool, his third year at Liverpool, you could see that the foundations were there. It's just the tactical flexibility, they needed to approach it, and maybe force that a little bit more. But once they got into that rhythm and they got the players to actually execute that, we were brilliant. And I think Patrick Vieira is focusing a lot on tactics, and I think it's good. But I do think he also needs to build some technical base for the players so that even when they get outplayed tactically, they have some kind of coaching to rely on if they want to control the game. And if Patrick Vieira can do that with Crystal Palace, what's going to happen is that when he moves on from Crystal Palace and he goes to a new team, he knows exactly what to do. He will set the technical base and then build the tactics upon it. And he will turn out to be a good manager, but he has to get those foundations right. Klopp and all these Pep Guardiolas, they're successful because they set the foundations right first time. They have the advantage of coaching good teams with good players so they can achieve results even when they're working on certain things. But I think Crystal Palace have got a decent amount of players, they're no joke. They do have the problem of scoring goals. I feel like Crystal Palace probably have this problem where they're not able to get enough goals. But overall, it's a very good team. And I think Patrick Vieira is putting himself in a position where he can prove himself, which I was surprised with. When I first saw Patrick Vieira, I think he played in the French league somewhere with some team, coached some team. I felt like, okay, this is another football player that's trying to make it in manager. And most of these guys, they wouldn't be where they are if they aren't football managers. And I feel that sometimes with some people. Patrick Vieira is changing my opinion because he's doing pretty well. This is no joke what he's done here. One point I would like to add in all of this is because of the way Palace set up, these spaces weren't completely exploited, or these spaces between the centre-back and full-back weren't completely exploited, but there were many times in which Konate kind of made some mistakes in the way he positioned his body and all of that. And what I'm trying to say is that, let's say, for example, the ball was in this position, right? Crystal Palace's attacker is here. Fabinho is probably somewhere here. Henderson is probably somewhere here. Now, this is a counter-attack. So these players are very much advanced to our midfielders. And our midfielders, like I said, are overrun, There's no two ways about it. The ball is here, in this position. A player is attacking here. So Konate has to position his body so that he's got a small eye on the ball, but he's covering this position. If you look at Konate's body language, in many points during the second half, crazy display from Crystal Palace, what you saw was that his eye was pointing towards the ball, which was here, and his body language was completely like this. So maybe he was aware that this player was coming in, but he was not ready to face him. And what that did was, when this player came in, it confused him because this player was also coming in. Benteke was already here, and I felt like Konate did make a few mistakes in the way he positioned his body. He's just looking at the ball, which is 80 degrees away, and he's forgetting that there's a player here. And so the thing is, you need to divide your attention. See, the player that is here, you should divide your attention correctly, right? It should be that this is how you're doing it. Maybe little more, right? So that the angles are right. But, Konate has got one eye on the ball and one eye on the player so that he knows how to judge correctly and defend the situation. But you didn't see that with Konate, and this is one of the reasons why I think he needs some time to get used to it. I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he will improve. The issue with things like this is that Konate would find himself here and VVD was here, or VVD was here and Konate would be somewhere here. So the alignment or the pairing between the centre backs again was not very clear. With the way Konate played, there was, I don't know if it was a lack of communication or just understanding, or has Konate trained? I don't know. So you got these kind of mixed feelings that Konate isn't comfortable, right? But what's interesting is that, Liverpool did not attack so much. But when they did attack, they tried their best. Salah lost the ball many times in this position, but at one point, we got a corner. And I think this is where the game changed, and we went from defending in the second half to attacking. So a ball comes in, and Salah scores a goal, and boom, the game entirely changes. We scored against the run of play, if we're being absolutely honest. But once we scored that goal, it was like we were done. Crystal Palace did not score a goal. During 35 minutes they attacked, and we punished them. We got one opportunity out of the million that Palace had, and we scored. And that completely changed the game. So this was the second goal from Liverpool. Second one from a corner. Both times we had a ball deflected, either from the goalkeeper. I think this one was the one in which VVD got his head on the ball. That was the second goal, and Salah put his left foot in. So it was interesting, because after this, we basically attacked. And we didn't attack as much as we did in the first half. But, we found ourselves in good positions here, pushing the ball wide, pushing the ball in the center. And boom, just like that, we went from playing here to playing here, right? And that's what is interesting about this game, is that it's crazy. It's crazy how the game went. But I applaud Palace for not completely losing their minds and, throwing the game away. I didn't feel like Palace threw the game away. They didn't lose the game 3-0 because they threw the game away. They lost 3-0 because they didn't defend their corners well, and they gave too many corners away. That's also something that they probably should work on. They kept a cool head. They defended their regular self. Liverpool, again, pushing the ball wide, going into these positions. Liverpool were not fully ambitious, but they were ambitious enough to keep pushing the ball forward and actually, make some inroads here. Because if a certain player, Gini Wijnaldum, was playing for Liverpool, this last 15 minutes would have seen the ball go to VVD so many times that, most people would be absolutely angry. But on the contrary, you saw the ball go a lot more forward and, Liverpool simply pushing in the attack. Basically our midfielders launching long balls to Mane, and then Mane to Costa Simicas, Mane to, Jota. So Jota, I think, got involved more in this game. And then I think after the 70th minute, we had Curtis Jones. Curtis Jones actually breathed fresh air in. Because remember when I said we needed to make inroads in the midfield in the first half, and we didn't. And funnily enough, Curtis Jones was actually making inroads in the midfield area. He did push the Crystal Palace defense a little backwards by actually operating in these areas, getting the ball here and then coming in and operating in this area, getting the ball here, operating in this area. It was fun to watch because Curtis Jones is that kind of a player, very unique in that aspect, it's very interesting. If you look at Harvey Elliott, he's a very different type of player. He gets the ball and he tries to go wide. He tries to go in this position and then come in here, right? Or he tries to pass the ball. His passing is also very good, Harvey Elliott. Sometimes he gets a little jittery. I guess it's because of nerves or something. Curtis Jones is different. He wins the ball and then he just pushes forward. He finds players to pass to, give 1-2s, come into these positions. And I think it's going to be very interesting dynamic seeing these young players, because they're kind of like the future of Liverpool and how they're going to impact the team. I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm not sure how far both players are compatible to playing together, but if Jones is on the right and Arviel is on the left, we get a little bit of variety in midfield with both players forcing the issue in the spaces between the midfield and defense, which is excellent, which is exactly how teams should be playing, But again, even in these cases, these players, they are willing to put the ball wide and come in and, attack the ball from the wide areas. And Trent Alexander-Arnold is another young player, so it's going to be very interesting. You've got all these players with different ideas of how to play football and how to attack the opposition penalty area, and I think it's going to be very interesting watching this team evolve from this point on, which is what I'm expecting. I think this team is going to evolve. How far we're going to go in the championship, I don't know. How far we're going to go in the Champions League, I don't know. We got a good win against AC Milan, and one of my biggest concerns with Liverpool is we push our fullbacks so much forward. We attack too much, leaving these so that even if our fullbacks are here, right, we are leaving these spaces. We're leaving these spaces, and in other cases, these spaces open to attack from opposition players, and that's exactly what happened in AC Milan. We gave them too much space in this area. They came here, they went in, and then they scored, or they crossed the ball and they scored. And so even if AC Milan actually scored against the run of play, AC Milan exploited Liverpool's weakness in the way we defend during a goal kick or a long ball, and the way we position ourselves in some weird positions defensively, putting our defensive structure in jeopardy. Even if we do that, we most of the time defend, but it opens up these spaces, and in this case, it opens up this space, and we paid the price for some weird defensive setup against AC Milan, who basically scored, I think, in 2 goals in 2 minutes, in just 42nd minute, and basically got the lead. And they exploited us that way. And I think that was a wake-up call. We needed that. Coming back to Crystal Palace, though, Keita scored a wonderful goal. I mean, come on, what a goal that was. Again, a Liverpool corner cleared straight to Keita. Keita scores. And I was very surprised with the goal, but what a celebration that was. Very, very, very good shot. I think Keita did pretty well because he came on in the second half and he got a goal. He did pretty well. I think all of our players actually did decently. But coming to the man of the match for the game, it's Alison, Salah, and Henderson. I think Henderson did a good job. It was a weird starting position, and I was kind of critical of it when the game started. But it made sense, The expectation is that Kostas Tsimikas is going to put the ball in that deep, wide area. Salah, I think, did a very good job today. He was given a lot of balls. He lost a lot of it, but he was going 1-on-3 against these players. I felt like he pushed the ball well to the other and brought other players into the attack a little bit more. But I think Henderson did a lot more in terms of openly contributing. My issue with Henderson is that his defensive contribution was non-existent, and Palace simply ran through our midfield many times during the game. Alison made two crucial saves, not just in the 3rd minute, but I think one in the 78th minute or something. Basically keeping us in the game because I think we had just scored. And, he saved the ball from going into the back of the net from a very good position Palace had. And if you look at on the balance, right, all 3 players made great contributions. I think Henderson I'm removing because of his defensive contribution. Salah made a few mistakes in the sense that it was not mistakes, but he was bullied off the ball many times in this area. And, kudos to the guy that was defending Salah, the left back for Crystal Palace. He did a very good job. I don't know his name. I think Alison actually, in the end of the day, saved the game for us. Salah scored a goal, but Alison saved the game. So for me, I don't know, man. Salah is still very much there. I think the problem with just putting 3 names is that it makes it look like everybody else was nonsense. They were not. Trust me, I think everybody played well. I am naturally going to give the midfielders lower marks, but Thiago Alcantara launched so many attacks for us. Our attackers couldn't make good use of it. The question then becomes, who had the decisive contribution in the game? See, Salah scored a goal, and in general was one of those players who completely connected the attack. He had a very wide starting position, came in all the time, held the ball up here, tried to move the ball in this position, did a lot of running. I think it's very difficult, this one. So without Henderson, we couldn't have done a few attacks, but our midfield would have been just the same. Without Mo Salah, we couldn't have done a few of the attacks, but our midfield was just the same. Without Alison, though, we would have probably drawn the game or lost the game even. So this is the problem, right? In terms of gameplay, Salah played very well. So Alison makes no mistakes in this game. All of his passing, all of his defending, his organization during corners, everything is very good. So Alison has a perfect game. Salah has a very decisive impact, has a very important impact in the game. But Alison makes decisive impact. The games are won and lost if Alison does not save those balls. And I think begrudgingly or with a conflicting mind, I think, if I were to give Salah 8, so everybody else actually gets a 7.5 except for Konate, and everybody else gets a 7.5 for me except for Konate. Konate gets a 6.5, a 6. Everybody gets gets from 7 to 7.5. If Salah gets an 8, I guess Alison gets an 8.01. That's how close I think this is. But even then, I don't know how I can give it to Alison. I don't know. This is so hard. Alison or Salah? Let me know in the comments. I'm just going to leave it like that, I guess. This is crazy. Well, thank you for watching, though. See you next time.